are the elder brothers, the ones who are blind to comedy because they're too trapped by their own dead seriousness. And again, the image he uses, the parable in miniature, has the same kind of sad fun about it, the sad fun of Jewish humor generally, ghetto humor. The religious ones are blind guides, he says. And the ones they are guiding are blind also. They come inching their way down the street together, the guides with their white canes and the ones they are guiding with their cataract lenses thick as the bottom of Coke bottles. They take the ponderous wooden steps of cigar store Indians, blind to the fact that there isn't a cloud in the sky and the sun is shining. They're blind to the beauty and wildness of the day and of the world around them. Is life not more than what you think it is, Jesus says? Consider the lilies of the field, how they don't spin or toil or keep accounts, and yet Solomon, in all the plumage of his honorary doctorates, couldn't hold a candle to them. They're blind to each other and to their own deepest needs as human beings, and when the open manhole appears in the pavement before them, they are blind to it too, and go tumbling headlong with a splash that Abbott and Costello would have been proud of. People are prepared for everything, just about, I think, except for the fact that beyond the darkness of their blindness, there is a great light. They're prepared to go on breaking their backs, plowing the same old field until the cows come home without seeing, until they stub their toes on it, that there is a treasure buried in that field rich enough to buy Iowa. They're prepared for a God who strikes hard bargains, but not for a God who gives as much for an hour's work as for a day's. They're prepared for a mustard seed kingdom of God no bigger than the eye of a newt, but not for the great banyan it becomes with birds in its branches singing Mozart. They are prepared for the potluck supper at First Lutheran, but not for the marriage supper of the Lamb. And when the bridegroom finally arrives at midnight with vine leaves in his hair, they turn up with their lamps to light him on his way, all right, only they've forgotten the oil to light them, and stand there with their big, bare, virginal feet glimmering faintly in the dark. And finally, the gospel itself as comedy. The gospel itself as comedy. The coming together of Mutt and Jeff, the captain and the kids, the Wizard of Oz and the Scarecrow, the coming together of God in his unending greatness and glory, and man in his unending littleness, prepared for the worst but rarely for the best, prepared for the possible but never almost for the impossible. The good news breaks into a world where the news has been so bad for so long that when it is good, nobody hears it much except for a few. And who are the few who hear it? They are the ones who labor and are heavy laden, like everybody else, but who, unlike everybody else, know that they labor and are heavy laden. They are the last people you might expect to hear it, themselves the bad jokes and stooges and scarecrows of the world, the tax collectors and the whores and the misfits. They are the poor people, the ones who hear it, the broken people, the ones who, in terms of the world's wisdom, are children and madmen and fools. They've all cut themselves shaving, rich or poor, successes or failures as the world counts it. They're the ones who are willing to believe in miracles because they know it will take a miracle to fill the empty place inside them where grace and peace belong, with grace and peace. Oh, Sarah, with her china teeth, knows it will take a miracle to fill the empty place inside her, where she waits for a baby that will never come. So when the angel appears and tells her a baby is coming, she laughs, and Abraham laughs with her, because having used up all their tears, they have nothing but laughter left. Because although what the angel says may be too good to be true, who knows? Maybe the truth of it is that it's too good not to be true. Clearing his throat, the preacher speaks both the word of tragedy and the word of comedy, because they're both of them of the truth, and because Jesus speaks them both, blessed be he. The preacher tells the truth by speaking of the visible absence of God, because if he doesn't see and own up to the absence of God in the world, then he is the only one there who doesn't see it, and who then is going to take him seriously when he tries to make real what he claims also to see as the invisible presence of God in the world. Sin and grace, absence and presence, tragedy and comedy, they divide the world between them, and where they meet head-on, the gospel happens. Let the preacher preach the gospel of their preposterous meeting as the high, unbidden, hilarious thing it is. The comedy of God saving the most unlikely people when they least expect it. The joke in which God laughs with man and man with God. This is what King Lear, I think, glimpses when at the end of his tragic life, when the world has done its worst, he says to the daughter he loves, with death awaiting them both, "Come, let's away to prison, we two alone. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh." And now, this is going on too long. I'm just going to read you a very short section at the very end about the fairy tale. Like the fairy tale world, the world of the gospel is a world of darkness. Lots of darkness in fairy tales. And many of the great scenes of the gospel take place at night. The child is born at night. He had his first meal in the dark at his mother's breast, and he had his last meal in the dark too. The shutters closed. Everybody's straining to catch the first sounds of heavy footsteps on the stair, the first glint of steel in the shadowy doorway. In the garden, he could hardly see the face that leaned forward to kiss him, and from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, the sun went out like a match. So he died in the same darkness he was born in, and rose in it too, or almost dark, the sun just barely up, as it was just barely up again when only a few feet offshore, as they were hauling their empty nets in over the gunwales, they saw him once more, standing there barefoot in the sand near the flickering garnets of a charcoal fire. In the world of the fairy tale, the wicked sisters are dressed as if for a Palm Beach wedding. And in the world of the Gospels, it's the killjoys, the phonies, the nitpickers, the holier-than-thous, the loveless and cheerless and irrelevant, who more often than not wear the fancy clothes and go riding around in sleek little European jobs marked Pharisee, corps diplomatique, legislature, clergy. It's the ravening wolves who wear sheep's clothing, and the good ones, the potentially good anyway, the ones who stand a chance of being saved by God because they know they don't stand a chance of being saved by anybody else, they go around looking like the town whore, the village drunk, the crook from the IRS, because that's who they are. When Jesus is asked who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, he reaches out into the crowd and pulls out a child with a cheek full of bubble gum and eyes full of whatever a child's eyes are full of, and says, unless you can become like that, don't bother even to ask. And as for the king of the kingdom himself, whoever would recognize him? He has no form or comeliness. His clothes are what he picked up in a rummage sale. He hasn't shaved for weeks. He smells of mortality. We've romanticized Jesus' raggedness so long that we can catch echoes only of the way it must have scandalized his time in the horrified question of the Baptist disciples, "Are you he who was to come?" In Pilate's, "Are you the King of the Jews? You with pants that don't fit and a split lip?" In the black comedy of the sign they nailed over his head, where the joke was written out in 3 languages so nobody would miss the laugh. But the whole point of the fairy tale of the gospel is, of course, that he is the king, in spite of everything. The frog turns out to be the prince, the ugly duckling, the swan. The little gray man who asks for bread, the great magician with the power of life and death in his hands. And though the steadfast tin soldier falls into the flames, his love turns out to be fireproof, and what they find is a heart made of lead. There's no less danger and darkness in the gospel than there is in the Brothers Grimm, but beyond and above all, there is the joy of it, this tale of a light breaking into the world that not even the darkness can overcome. That is the gospel. That is the gospel, this meeting of darkness and light, of darkness and light, and the final victory of light. That is the fairy tale of the gospel, with, of course, the one crucial difference from all other fairy tales, which is that the claim made for it is that it is true. That it not only happened once upon a time, but has kept on happening ever since and is happening still. To preach the gospel in its original power and mystery is to claim, in whatever way the preacher finds it possible to claim, that once upon a time, in this time, now, and here, is the dark wood that the light gleams at the heart of like a jewel. And the ones who are to live happily ever after, the ones who are to live happily ever after are all who labor and are heavy laden, the poor, naked wretches, wheresoever they be.